Broadcasting from the Symphony Studios in Marietta, Georgia, it's time for the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. Tune in every week as we spotlight the very best minds in our industry. Now here are your hosts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 33rd episode of the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. I am your host today, Katie Galley, and we have a very other special episode of our Technology Harmony Podcast. It is part of our Meet the Team series, where we get to spotlight some amazing members of our Symphony team. And today, in the Symphony studio with me, I have VP of Sales with Symphony, Scott Firestine. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing good. And yourself?
I am doing awesome. Thank you for stopping by the studio and sharing your story with us today.
Sure.
Yeah.
No worries.
So, Scott, just to get to know your background a little bit, can you share with us a little bit about your professional journey and how you ended up in the job that you have today?
Yeah, so I started in construction way back in the day, probably too long ago, but I was actually a foreman pouring concrete, pouring walls for high rises for a company back then called Beers Construction, which is now Skanska. So I did that for several years until I got a phone call from a gentleman looking for a sales guy in construction, doing construction supplies. So I started with them after several years with Beers. And then from there, I went on to get a job in the technology industry. And back then, it was like Cat3 and Type 1 IBM cable and things like that. So it was fairly new at the time. Mm-hmm. And then from there, just kind of building up customers and jumped from probably a couple companies over the last 20 years. Probably worked for 3 over the last 20 years, but that's how it all came about.
Yeah, and then now you're here. Brought you all the way home to
all
Symphony.
The way to Symphony.
Yeah. So, Scott, back when you did make that shift from construction then into that technology space, what prompted that transition for you?
It was interesting. It was something new and different. Didn't know a whole lot about it, but you could tell that that's kind of the way things were going. Even in college for us, computers started to become a thing, and I'm really dating myself because they wasn't huge at the time, but you could tell things were going that way. Mm-hmm. And I just thought I'd try to jump in the front of it and try to make a career out of it. So, and it changes all the time, which makes it even more interesting.
Right.
Construction kind of stayed the same. It was the same old thing every day, where, technology changes so much that it keeps it interesting.
Yeah. And now, too, being able to be a little bit on the construction side, but in the property tech space, kind of marrying those two things. So having that construction background, but then bringing it together with that ever evolving technology and then bringing you into the role you have with Symphony.
Oh, absolutely. And there's still guys that I worked for back in the construction days that I still today will talk to and have seen them on jobs. So it makes it fun.
Yeah, I bet. And so, Scott, then making that transition, eventually leading you to becoming VP of Sales with Symphony, what ultimately brought you to Symphony and then into this role that you have today?
So I've known Eric for 20 years or more, probably more. I worked for Eric with a company called Suntech Systems back in 2000. And worked for him for 3-4 years before I left. Well, and he also left himself. And but before I left, and from there I went on to a company called MDU Systems, which I was part owner in that company. But then from there, I know I'm kind of jumping all over, but from there, then I went to OnePath, and at OnePath Systems. Eric had come back and started doing some work for us at OnePath. as a subcontractor. And we got to talking and so on. And after One Path sold, things kind of changed quite a bit. And I thought it was time to probably make a change. And I'd loved working with Eric in the past at Suntech. So that's kind of how I came over to Symphony.
Yeah, made that shift. And it seems like a trend is that, building relationships with people. And then that kind of helps build you into the next phase of your career.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Scott, now being such an integral part of Symphony and a big piece of your story is making that transition from construction into technology, and then ultimately marrying those two together into what you do today. And a big mission of Symphony is to create technology harmony, which is the name of our podcast, and what we're putting out there. It's crazy. Yeah. So for you, Scott, what does creating technology harmony mean?
So for me, there's not many companies out there that tie all the systems together and make them all work and talk together. Mm-hmm. And so for us, that's probably the fun part, is being able to take the security and the voice and data and the IRCs and the DAS and the locks on doors and things like that. The nests that are in the units for apartments and things like that, and tying that all together and making it easier for the customer in the end.
Yeah.
They don't have to, they can deal with one contractor, or I should say integrator, to tie it all up for them. And all they got to do is go to their computer and they can look at whatever they want.
Yeah. So bringing it all together. And I know we've toyed too with Trey has toyed with the phrase, the integrator that actually integrates. So actually bringing everything together and
Correct.
Doing what we say we're going to do.
Yes. Instead of having one contractor does this, one contractor does this, an integrator does this, we kind of put it all together and make it work.
There you go. Well, Scott, if someone wanted to learn more about you and get in touch with you, where might they do that?
So you can get in touch with me through my LinkedIn or through our Symphony website.
Thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest and their company, check out the show notes for the relevant links. If you would like to learn more about us here at Symphony, of course, subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at Symphony Technology Solutions, and on Instagram at Symphony Tech Solutions. Here at Symphony, our ultimate goal is to make harmonious music out of all the technological noise. And we hope today's episode helped in doing just that. See you next time.